So now that I've completed my 3 outcomes, I thought it would be a good idea to just evaluate them and think about them in terms of the context and end user, and just think about where I'm going next with my project. So obviously I've been evaluating as I've been going along and have come to the outcomes that I have finished now. So, just to sum up all of them in general, because I have been constantly thinking about what I'm doing, and every design decision I made, I thought about really carefully and with my theme, context, and end user in mind. So I would say that all 3 of them definitely fulfill the brief and the intended purpose, and all 3 of them most definitely reflect my theme of Gothic Lolita and celebrate Japanese street fashion. So if I start with my ring piece, my hand piece, I'm gonna name all of my pieces of jewelry. Because if I'm aiming for something luxury, normally jewelry items and collections, they have names. So this is something else I need to think about, but I'll get onto that later. So if I talk about my ring handpiece first, then that, because of all the development and careful evaluation and decision making I did, that definitely fulfills the brief. So starting with the appearance of all 3 pieces, all 3 of them encompass the aesthetic of Gothic Lolita, and that is because when I did the designing of all the individual components, I took inspiration from appropriate sources such as Gothic architecture, Gothic theory, Gothic colour theory, Gothic images of Gothic Lolita, and all of the materials that I've chosen are relevant and have meaning in one way or another, whether it's because of the colour they are that fits the Gothic colour palette, or whether it's because it's a material that is used within Gothic Lolita clothing, such as the lace and the ribbons, or if it's the way I used it, or if it's what it represents. So, for example, with the wool, that has kind of like a double effect, because the wool that I used for the necklaces, not only is that practical because it's comfortable to wear, it's easy to manipulate, and it's very workable, but the deeper meanings behind the wool are also relevant. For example, it's like removed from an animal, so it has this sense of like decay and like remnants, savageness, ruggedness, rustic, they're all vibes that underlie the collection of these pieces, of these jewelry pieces, and that in itself is not only very Gothic, but it's also a strong characteristic of Japanese street style, this idea of recycling, reinventing, of rustic aesthetic. It's all very relevant and prevalent within Japanese street style. So aesthetically, all three pieces achieve what I wanted to achieve. They all express Gothic Lolita subculture through the choice of materials, through the way they look, through the different shapes, through the different textures and forms, and even the way I constructed them, and even my process of constructing them. My process of constructing them was very considerate and organic because it mimics the way Japanese street style emerges. Designing constantly with my model in mind was also really helpful because, and using the templates and just working in 3D rather than working from a drawing and that being the like be all and end all of everything, but being organic and always testing and trying things out has led to really successful designs, because it gave me a lot more freedom while still being accurate to the model. So the model that I chose was also a good choice because it was something that I had to think about early on in the process, because if my jewellery is intended for males, then it's good to involve that as soon as possible so that I know that the jewellery works for the intended purpose. The model I chose I'm very happy with because his look reflects the mood of my jewellery also. So I think this worked really well in terms of giving the whole like project and making process like good clarity and continuity and just everything working well together. So I'm really happy with my choice of model and the way that all of the jewelry pieces fit to the model. They like practically they all fit very well, and aesthetically they all fit very well. So when I decide on the presentation and really specify the context completely, I know that I can use the same model if I decide to like do a jewelry shoot or something because they fit the overall look. So that was a good shout. So the next obvious point to think about is practicality. So the practicality has been a big kind of consideration during this whole process of making the outcomes because, like I always say, it has to be wearable, but the aesthetic and the expression of my theme is more important than it being like the most completely functional, easiest thing to wear ever. And I've explained why before. So all of my pieces, they are wearable and they are functional enough without compromising the overall look of the jewellery. And they are all very unconventional. So I have achieved this also. So the necklaces, they are a little on the heavy side, so but for someone, so as my model is wearing it, for example, like it works for him because of his build and someone of his stature is able to wear a piece like that, whereas if you were very short and very thin, then you might struggle to wear a piece like that. And in that case, the piece would be adjusted and made to fit you because that's how the whole concept of my work is made to measure, rather than mass producing one specific size. So that isn't really an issue. But I mean, ideally, if practicality was more important, then it would be lighter so that you could wear it comfortably for a longer time period. But if you're making a statement and you're wearing this jewelry to make a statement, I mean, how long are you going to be making a statement for? It's not like you need to be wearing this piece for like the whole entire day. You can make your statement and you don't have to wear it anymore. So I don't really see this as an issue. But if I was thinking of improving my design, then I would ideally like to cast the pewter components hollow. So if this was real life and I had more time to develop and access to more like machines and technology and things, I would I would have the pieces hollow, which would make the overall piece lighter, because that is mainly the heaviest thing. The heaviest part of the necklace is the pewter pieces. So, and if I wanted to take it a step further, then I would also see how I could make the mortar pieces lighter. So, if it would be possible to have those hollow as well. So that's something that I would do if I could. But for the sake of the project, it's not really a problem. So I'm happy with the designs and they're really successful and they meet the criteria of my brief. Another point for improvement on the rings is that ideally I would like it so that it was glueless, so you can, or that you can see the glue. So if you look really closely, you can see the glue, but it's on the underside, so it's not a big deal. But once again, if I was going to develop and refine this, then I would find a way of like not using glue at all, or find a way that the glue could be concealed, so just to give it that higher finish. But as a prototype, it's really successful. And the final point for the necklaces is that the mortar pieces I did have to use, and for some of the other components as well, I did have to use hot glue to fix them in place. So if I was gonna develop and refine this as well, I would adjust where I buried the embroidery threads and the materials in the mortar so that the strings were closer together, so that I could attach it to the frame tighter, so that the mortar pieces didn't flop so much. Same with the pewter pieces. So that would be a quick fix to the solution, but I mean, there's always ways that you can improve it even more. So that would be something else that I looked into if this was my actual job in real life and I had more time with this project. A really interesting point that came up when I was chatting to my tutor about my work and getting a second opinion on it was that because my pieces, especially because the necklaces are big pieces of jewellery. Now, they are big pieces of jewellery because they are encompassing lots of different aspects of the theme and expressing it in lots of different ways. So the point is that the jewellery, the necklaces, they are big for a reason, because you're making a statement and you're expressing this theme and celebrating it. So if it's something tiny on you, then it can have a lot of value and it can express a lot. But if you're wanting to make a fashion statement and an impact like straight away, then big is better. So scale in that sense, that's why the sheer volume of the pieces work. They're more like wearable art. They're celebrating the idea of craft and the maker and the wearer. So that is the point to those. But when I was chatting with my tutor, he was saying that because the small components, like the small pieces of pewter, the small mortar pieces, were very detailed and expressive in themselves, maybe you don't need something so big physically to like capture value and to express what you're trying to. So with this in mind, it's a very interesting theoretical point. So what I plan to do is I'm gonna experiment with some of my small pewter casts and mortar casts and try and wear them in different ways and see what kind of look and jewelry I'm able to achieve on a smaller scale, because it could work really well. So, and still and still express, I believe that it will still express the theme in a slightly quieter way, which in some cases isn't necessarily less powerful. So that is something that I intend to play around with next. And then once I've done this, I'll be able to evaluate that and see how it measures up with the big pieces that I've already done, or the immensely complex pieces that I've already done. So that's an interesting thought.
So I had a couple of thoughts after finishing all three pieces and seeing what they are. I had a couple of thoughts about the context and what the appropriate way to present my outcomes is, like how would this actually be working in the industry, and for what they're intended for. So something that I've been thinking about is I am unsure whether, I know that the nature of my work definitely does not fit definitely does not fit mass-produced high street retail. That's not what it suits at all. So that is definitely not the context I'm aiming for. The issue I'm having now is that I'm trying to work out whether my jewellery is more high fashion or whether it's more a kind of craft fair, like where like small scale individual designer maker type jewellery, which is quite low key, and that you'd sort of be promoting and presenting at like craft fairs, or whether it is more high fashion and to that kind of level. So what I need to do is research high fashion and what that really means, and whether what I've done like lives up to that context, or whether my jewellery is more low-key designer maker jewellery, which just because if it is an individual, because that doesn't necessarily equal not luxury, so I just really need to clarify this and think about it and just figure out really specifically what my context is, and then after doing this, after figuring this out, then I'll know what the best method to present my pieces at is. So if say I'm aiming for like high fashion or catwalk, then I just need to present in a way that's suitable for that, whereas if I'm thinking of me, I'm a design maker, I'm individual, low-key, the way I promote my work is at events, specifically designed for like design crafts and things, so obviously I'll be presenting my work a lot differently. So this is something I really need to like get figured out. So my next step is to research high fashion, and see if I feel like my work relates to that kind of thing, and just figure out my specific context, and then what the appropriate way to present my work is. But I feel like I'm heading in a really positive direction with my project, it's going really well. And just one more thought is that, I know in my brief I have said that I was going to make 4 or 5 individual pieces, and Ebony and really well in 3 pieces. So it's not, I'm using a wide range of techniques and methods, so there's no need to create more.